At Commerce Bank, mutual respect among team members is critical because our business is built on collaboration. That's why our bank's culture values diversity and encourages dialogue. We believe our bank is made stronger when people representing diverse perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences work together. We work each day to foster an inclusive and supportive environment where all 4,900 of our team members feel their voices are heard. The fact is, everyone benefits when people feel comfortable bringing their authentic selves to work. Of course, an inclusive and diverse culture does not spring up by itself. It takes intentional planning and commitment. At Commerce, it begins with how we recruit and engage with team members. Today, we have programs dedicated to increasing representation at all levels of our bank and fostering an environment that welcomes all perspectives. We've also created several employee resource groups to help our team members grow professionally and connect with others who share similar interests, backgrounds, and experiences. These groups include connections for women, multicultural, young, and LGBTQIA+ professionals and their allies. All are open to every Commerce team member. Commerce also extends its diversity and inclusion efforts into the larger community through participation in diversity initiatives and in minority-focused chambers of commerce, including our participation in today's DEI workshop series. Much work remains to be done, but it is made easier when we all work together. And now to introduce today's speakers. Jeremiah Enna, Executive Director of the Störling Dance Theatre and the Culture House, and Ray Jarrett, Executive Director of UniteKC. They will share the history of the Underground Railroad, an inspiring story that reminds us again that Black history is indeed American history.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Shauna, for that. I'm Jeremiah Enna. And as we get into this, I wanted to share kind of what you should expect this afternoon with this speech, and who's kind of online helping me and a part of what I'm doing. And so I've got a PowerPoint and I think it's going to work. I hope it's going to work. I'm trying to share it now. Here we go. So hopefully everyone can see that. No, you can't. Now you can. Can everyone see that? We're doing good, Laura?
Yep, doing great.
Okay, so let's get it going as a slideshow. And here we go. So today, besides who's kind of backing me up, I run the Culture House, an arts organization, and Störling Dance Theatre. And you're going to hear a lot about Störling because they have been performing a production called Underground, about the Underground Railroad, for 15 years now in Kansas City. And that's a big impetus behind why I was invited to share today. Also, you're going to meet Ray Jarrett, a good friend, and Ray is the Executive Director of UniteKC, as Shauna said. And we work together on a lot of projects. UniteKC has just sprung up. He'll tell you about it. But it also represents something that's very important to me, which is that as I learned about the Underground Railroad, I'm confronted with the question, what am I doing about these issues today? And so UniteKC is very much a part of that. Another guest that's somewhere online in this Zoomiverse that we're all sharing today is a dear friend named Dr. Luke Bobo. And after we started performing Underground, the show, we started to see the effect and the need to bring people together. And so Luke and I ended up developing this booklet. It's a group discussion booklet, and you're going to hear more about that as well. So Luke is with us today out there. And then Shannon Benton and Kevin Cloud, people from both UniteKC and Störling Dance Theatre and the Culture House, they're running our chat line. So if you have any questions, please put them on the chat. They're going to gather those for the Q&A afterwards. And also, I'm going to be mentioning some books and some links and things, and Shannon and Kevin will be posting those on the chat. So if you hear me speak about a book that interests you, definitely look to the chat for that. They'll be posting the links, and if somehow you don't catch it, you can contact us. and we'll get that information to you. Because one of the things that has happened in my life studying the Underground Railroad is just, I am a book buyer. And there are so many incredible books and more coming out all the time, because we're discovering a lot of this information just over the last 20 years. So this afternoon, I'm going to do kind of a cursory look at the Underground Railroad. It's a lot of history. It's very rich and important history, but in this amount of time, I'm going to zoom you through it and explain to you kind of why I started studying it. And I'm going to talk to you about Störling Dance Theatre's production, Underground, which has become a huge part of our lives, the cast and crew of Underground. And you're going to hear about UniteKC. So before we get into the Underground Railroad in the United States, we're going to go back to, oh, someone's coming in.
Some way to get it.
Oh.
Just see that screen instead of we're seeing your.
Gotcha. We are switching the screens. I don't know how to do that. Give me 2 seconds, folks, to get technically.
I think you can go to display settings and there should be a place where you can change the view.
Settings on Zoom.
Display settings, move over to the left-hand side of the screen on the top. Up.
Gotcha.
Right there. I think there's.
Swap. Are we good?
Try the other. Oh, there you go. There it is.
Glory. Thank you, folks. First, we're going to go to England. And why are we going to England? Because the abolition movement and the anti-slavery movement really got started there and traveled to the
Jeremiah, it looks like you got muted.
Okay, guys, we've been practiced. So I'm going to go back to England. We're going to England first because there's some distinct differences between England and America, and because the abolition movement really got started in England and traveled to the States, and people from England moved to the States to establish the country and brought some good ideas with them and some bad ideas. So what are those distinctions? Well, one thing I want to point out on that screen is the two terms abolition movement and anti-slavery movement. They were kind of synonymous in England, but they take kind of a different turn, if you will, in the States that we'll bring up later, but just remember those two terms. So here are some important figures in England that I wanted to point out, although there were many others to point out. The first one is George Fox. George Fox started the Society of Friends, which really is what the Quakers became, that name Quaker. And he was a passionate man. And one of the reasons that I went into this information wasn't just to study the history of the abolition movement, but because I wanted to find out the difference between the people who did the right thing and the people who did not do the right thing. And actually, before I keep going, I was encouraged to share a little bit about myself, and I should do that right now, which is I'm originally from Kansas City. I got my degree in theater at UCLA in Los Angeles, and immediately upon graduating, I moved to Sweden and joined a group of artists, a dance theater company where I composed music for the company, and I danced and performed in the company. And so I lived in Europe for 6 years. And during that time, had an experience that had some similarities to my interest in the Underground Railroad. And that is, we did a production about a young Jewish man and the story of the Jewish people. And it got me delved into the history of the Holocaust. And during that time, I developed that same question I just mentioned. What was the difference between the people who did the right thing to protect the Jews and fight anti-Semitism, as opposed to the people who did not? And in particular, in the West, in a Christian culture, a Judeo-Christian culture, where the churches were full, what was the difference between the Christian people who did the right thing and the Christian people who did not do the right thing? And in both cases, between the Holocaust and between the Underground Railroad situation, the majority of people did not do the right thing. They went to church, but they did not do the right thing. And I wanted to know the difference because I had become a Christian person, and I knew though that I was very vulnerable to not doing the right thing. I wanted to know why. And so that's what launched me into this study of history and this pursuit of truth and goodness. And so in England, we'll go back to England, and George Fox was someone who was just so irritating to people. Because why? Because he was living his life according to biblical principles, and he would remind people why if they were not doing it. So he is quite a character, and he traveled all over England talking to people about slavery, the evils of slavery, and his group, the Society of Friends, became one of the prominent voices, non-Black voices, against slavery. The next person is probably the most prominent figure and powerful figure in the abolition movement, Olaudah Equiano. He became a slave at 12. He was sold to a captain of a ship, and later to another captain of a ship. So he traveled the world learning his trade. He was educated. He learned to read and write. And what's so impressive about him is he ended up purchasing his own freedom. So he did all this work, purchased his own freedom, a man of great integrity, and then he used his freedom to help fight slavery and fight the culture of the slave trade. He authored the most important book in England at the time, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. And he used that book, and they shared it through the abolition movement to share it with all kinds of people about the evils and the horrors of the slave trade. It's important to point out that the slave trade at this time and what became the slave culture in the United States or in America was a particularly cruel and horrible form of slavery. Not that slavery sounds good at all, but historically, a world that has always used slavery. This was different than what you might have read about other cultures where someone would have taken another country and taken their people as slaves. Oftentimes, those would be more like what we think of as indentured servants. Of course, there are horrors there too. But the slave trade in England and Europe and the slave trade in America was particularly horrific. And Olaudah made that clear to everybody and converted people. Phyllis Wheely is a fascinating character, the first Black woman to be published, a poet. But she didn't just write, she traveled the country reading her poems and waking people up to the horrors of slavery. And she even came to the States doing the same thing. And you start to see that cross-pollination between abolitionists in England and the States. Lady Middleton is a fascinating character, born into wealth, gave up her wealth because she wanted to marry the man she wanted to marry and not the ones her parents did, became an ardent abolitionist and really one of the prominent non-Black abolitionists and evangelists for the abolition movement. And then finally, one of her most famous converts, if you will, that Olaudah and Margaret Middleton converted was William Wilberforce, who was a parliamentarian and one of the people responsible for ending slavery and the slave trade in England. And this brings up an important distinction between England and the United States. The end of slavery in England was a bloodless coup. They ended slavery without a war. And whereas in America, as we know, the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of lives were lost. Were lost in the slave culture, of course. Black Americans were lost in the slave culture, but then also fighting slavery, hundreds of thousands were lost in the Civil War. Okay. Now, this is where we see this abolition movement and anti-slavery movement move across to the States. And here we have America, and I have arrows going before 1776 and after. And this is really important to understand that 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, there was already a fervent anti-slavery movement or passions in the country. But it's very complicated and it's not simplistic at all. But there's some interesting facts that might be intriguing to people. And for example, in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson actually wrote a statement condemning the slave trade and trying to purge the country of it. But I guess it was very poorly written, and the numbers just weren't there to vote this into the document and keep it. So they purged it of the document. In fact, of the 56 signers, only 15 were non-slave owners or were against slavery. The rest of the signers either owned slaves themselves or they were for slavery but didn't own slaves. So that first statement was purged from the document and wasn't included in the Declaration of Independence. And so what we find is something that's not as simple as for slavery, against slavery, but really a mess of ideas and motivations and people groups in America. You have Quakers and anti-slavery people. So Quakers were against slavery and they didn't own slaves and they wouldn't own slaves and they would stand up against slaves. Doesn't mean that every single Quaker fought in the underground or worked in the Underground Railroad movement, but that their whole culture was about that. But you also had slave owners who were anti-slavery, very confusing category, full of a myriad of different situations. Some people, for example, that are famous, like Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, they both owned slaves, but they both were anti-slavery. And Benjamin Franklin actually fervently was against slavery at the end, but still owned slaves. So that's a bizarre approach that is confusing to the history and not worthy of respect, but it was one of the groups. You also had anti-slavery racists. So this is where you have some of the Northerners who were against slavery, but they didn't care about the people who were enslaved. They cared about the advantage that the Southern businesses had over the Northern ones. So the Southern businesses that had slaves had an economic advantage, and that's what they wanted to end. And so they're anti-slavery, but not really pro-people. And so that's also a confusing categories. And then of course you have the slave owners that were promoters. So what do you have in America that's slightly different than England? You have a hairball, a totally messy hairball of different groups of people fighting for different reasons. And what I focused on in this presentation though, is not just the Black abolitionists. And in fact, I want to point out that difference now in the States. In America, that abolition anti-slavery movement traveled to the States and really became what we know as the abolition movement. The anti-slavery movement became that other category where the people were mainly concerned about economics. But this is kind of, this is a hard fact. The terms were interchanged a bit, but it became kind of confusing. Didn't everyone who was anti-slavery care about the people who were enslaved? And the truth is no. It's quite a bizarre collection of ideas. And also, let's be clear about the Underground Railroad movement, the abolition movement. Who were the real strident leaders and the majority of the workers? They really were the Black community, which included Black abolitionists, of course, former slaves, escaped slaves, and born free Blacks, because of course there were people in the North who were born free here in the States, who had businesses and work, and who were prominent contributors to society. And they also used their freedom to fight slavery. So I'm going to talk about both Black and white people in the Underground Railroad movement, because that was what was interested me is, what brought these people together and how did they work together to fight this evil? And as you study the history, because there were some white people involved, you realize it's not necessarily a case about white versus Black, but it's really a case about good versus evil. And I was curious, because I'm a white person, of course, what was it that brought them together to do this together? But as I will talk about white abolitionists and Black abolitionists, and as I do, I want to make it real clear, the majority came from the Black community. But if you're looking for a non-Black group in that hairball of people that had integrity, it really was the Quakers. Like I said, not every single Quaker put their life on the line, but there was that strong threat against slavery. It was pretty cohesive in their community, and they stood for what was right in this case. So Quakers get a lot of points. But as I looked at the history, if you're a Quaker today, doesn't mean you would have chosen that back then. And as a person looking at the history, I'm not looking at it to justify myself, but I'm looking at it to go, who can I emulate? I want to be like that Quaker. I want to be like that abolitionist today. And what does that mean today? And so in that group that fought slavery and was a part of the Underground Railroad, you've got Quakers, you've got anti-slavery people, you've got American Indians. And in fact, if you don't know, locally, we have an incredible story of an American Indian named Quindaro. The town of Quindaro was featured in the Kansas History Journal a couple of years ago. And Quindaro is a district, an old town, abandoned town in the Kansas City, Kansas district. She was an American Indian from the Wyandot tribe. And she and her husband, her white husband, purchased the land and established Quindaro to help runaway slaves get to freedom, and also to help secure Kansas as a free state. Quindaro, I think, is going to become a huge part of our culture here in Kansas City. Pastor Stacey Evans is an important part of that. You'll hear about her hopefully in the future. I'm a big fan. In 1777, we already see signs of the Underground Railroad movement and the push to abolish slavery. And that's important to understand. Even though they couldn't get the votes on the Declaration of Independence, there was a grassroots groundswell pushing against it with the Quakers and the freed Black community. But you had some politicians. And already in 1777, after the Declaration of Independence, the freedom from England, Virginia abolishes slavery. And then you start to see Pennsylvania in 1780, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island. And so they start pushing away back at slavery right away. It was one of the primary things happening. It wasn't the only thing, but to the abolition movement, it was primary. And that was the first thing they started attending to after the country was established. But there were also things that they did that had unintended consequences. So they blocked slaves from being sold in the West, but then that pushed slavery deeper into the South. How did the Underground Railroad work, and what did the runaway slaves experience? Well, this is such an important question. And for example, and some people thought the Underground Railroad was an actual railroad. And it wasn't. It was a network of like-minded friends and cohorts. And so it really worked through communication, through people meeting, sharing information, and they would travel to meet each other. It could happen at church gatherings. It could happen with a businessman who ends up finding out there's another businessman who was against slavery, and they would have to confide themselves. But it was actually very dangerous business, because not only could you lose everything, you could lose your life. And of course, we know that there were Black Americans who lost their lives in slavery and also running. And there were a few non-Black citizens who lost their life as well. And so what would happen is, if a slave would hear, they might hear on the plantation themselves, a freed slave might get information to the slaves that there was a way to get out, and maybe the first stop on the railroad, a free house. And so they would escape and go there. And then it was basically from free space to free space, from freedom person to freedom person, leading them out of slavery and the territories where it was legal to be a slave. They might go to a Black person's home or a white person's home, and wherever it went. But it was all just communication through people. There could be flyers, there could be a news article in a free state, There could be all kinds of ways to spread the message, but it was a very unique thing. In some of the books I've read on the Underground Railroad, they'll say things like, this is more in the past, probably prior to 25 years ago. They'll say, well, it just sprung up out of nowhere. It popped up everywhere over the country, and this just isn't really true. It popped up mainly in Quaker circles and church circles that were anti-slavery. It popped up, of course, amongst the Black community looking for freedom, and when they would connect to someone who was white in the country that was against slavery, that would spread that way. And then, of course, there was the preachers and teachers. And if you see the maps, you'll notice it all headed north, of course, but into Canada. Why Canada? Because you could be completely free and free from slave hunters who would even go into the free states and recapture slaves and drag them back to slavery. But in Canada, they couldn't do that. So a lot of the abolitionists sent people all the way to Canada for freedom. Let's meet some of the really prominent leaders. Some you may know, and I hope to introduce you to a few characters that you may not know who are just incredibly inspiring and important people. Here in America now, you have the Underground Railroad leaders. William Still, born free in Philadelphia. And he was responsible for thousands of people getting to freedom. A very important character. And he was the chairman of the Vigilance Committee and the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Committee. And the Vigilance Committee was really a department of the Anti-Slavery Society. And what was that really? Well, if the law and order wasn't doing the right thing, they would just kind of help them along. But he became passionate about this. He was a member, but became the chairman after he was helping a runaway slave. And in the middle of the interview, realized this was his own long lost brother that he was separated from. And so very powerful man and moving story. Thomas Garrett is the white gentleman next to him. And Garrett was an ardent abolitionist. And he led, and one of the things that was distinct about him was he didn't hide it. He didn't have a secret room where he had people. He let everyone know. And then eventually they arrested him and put him in jail and fined him $4,500, which destroyed him financially. And at the court, when he was fined, he said to the judge and to everyone there, "You have left me with not a dollar, but let it be known that if anyone, any Black is looking to be free, they have a friend in Thomas Garrett and can stay with me." So he was relentless in the face of slavery. Harriet Tubman is, of course, so famous and led somewhere between 70 and 300 slaves to freedom herself, and is a towering figure, probably the most famous figure. Levi Coffin led over 3,000 to freedom. And then Frederick Douglass is the orator, the preacher who traveled, and a fearless man traveled to fight slavery and let people know about that. I can't go into all these stories because I'll run out of time, but everyone, if you get a copy of this book, there's a one-page story about Elizabeth Van Lew and Mary Bowser. Mary Bowser was a spy. They were spies for the Union Army and helped fight that fight. So incredible women. And if you notice the picture of Mary Bowser, she's quite young. So a brilliant woman with a photographic memory who helped the Union Army win some of the wars. There are challenges and myths, like did they use quilts and lights and things? And while most of those seem to be a bit mythical, they probably did happen a little bit. In fact, in Quindaro, while there weren't tunnels all over the country, there were tunnels they built to hide slaves as they got away. So finally, I just wanted to feature some of the books that we've looked at. Forbidden Fruit is a book that's been really inspiring. If you want to just delve into this Underground Railroad history a little bit, that's a really easy read, very important read and unique in that it tells love stories where people, for example, there's a slave who was free. He got free, he ran, but he had a wife and children back at the plantation, so he re-enslaved himself. and took the beating that he knew he would get in order to be with his family. The interesting narrative of the life of Olaoda Equiano is very powerful and eye-opening. And then the Gateway to Freedom I point out, because there have been challenges as to whether, oh, did the Underground Railroad ever really happen? And about 15 years ago, they discovered at Columbia University boxes of stories where a gentleman in New York City had interviewed over 200 runaway slaves on their way to Canada, and really helped provide ironclad historical documentation of the Underground Railroad movements. There are other books that I found really interesting. A Legacy of Hatred is really about the Holocaust, and it's asking the question why Christians can't, why we should remember. And really, I would say why everyone should remember. Once again, both in the Holocaust and in the Underground Railroad, those people who went to church, who did the right thing, were the ones that wove the Bible into their daily lives. It wasn't just a weekend activity. Jews in the Civil War is fascinating because we don't hear much about their participation in fighting slavery. And slaves in the family that talk about when plantation owners or white people would have children with slaves and how that bound families together is also absolutely fascinating. I have a couple minutes left. I want to share with you about Störling Dance Theatre's Underground. All of this study that my wife and I did led us to decide when back in 2000, we had moved to the States, and we started to see that something just wasn't right, that the Black community wasn't thriving, and there was unrest. And we had friends, of course, who were Black. And so we started thinking and praying about it. And we decided that we wanted to do a production about the Underground Railroad. And so we went to one of our company members who had also been our boss, Tobin James. She was a good friend, and said, would she choreograph that with Mona? And she agreed. Jay Pfeiffer decided to compose the music. And so it took 4 years from, let's see, 2004 to 2008. It took creating the show, all the costumes handmade, hand-dyed, and we premiered it at the Lyric Theater in Kansas City. And we had a unique experience. Normally, we would present the show, and then you put it away and bring it back years later. But the response was so passionate that we did it again, and then we did it again, and we did it again, and people kept calling for it. And then as they were getting ready to open the Kauffman Center, Dr. Jane Chu called us and asked if we would move it into the Kauffman Center, which we were more than thrilled to do. And that began this really tradition that started in the community, where every year we would present Underground, and it would bring white people and Black people together. And the cast, which had over 60 people, some from outside of Kansas City and even from Europe. There are cast members that come over to do the show every year. And we would share the stories of the Underground Railroad, and we would inspire each other to be like those good people that chose the good things to do. Let's do it today. And let's start by sharing this important story. And so in this picture, you see some of the key performers, some of whom have been in the show for over 10 years. I want to share a few pictures from the show with you all, because just to share some of the background behind the scenes information of why we made certain choices as we wrote the storyboard for the show. One thing here, this is a dance, a pas de deux, between the lead character, Victoria, and her husband, Tambo, both living on the same plantation. Prior to this scene, you see her searching for him. He's lost, she can't find him. She hasn't seen him for too long. And this is kind of a dream sequence where she's remembering their love and affection for each other. And we put this in there. I remember Tobin called the day and said, we have to put this in here. And we put this in here because the destruction of the Black family through slavery was horrific, where plantation owners, slave owners would sell off family members to specifically to break up the family. It was cruel and horrible. And we wanted to remind people of the beauty of the family, and of course the beauty of the Black family even during slavery. And so then in this scene you have a plantation scene where there's a big gala at the plantation, and if you'll notice, the slaves who are in the back there, their costumes are the same colors as the curtains. And so that was specifically chosen because, of course, back then, slave was considered property. And so we wanted to somehow express that. And that was one of the things that we did to express that. Another aspect that we wanted to express in this same scene was that you'll see the majority of the plantation people in the middle having their party. And on the right side of the picture is a slave. She's cleaning up the floor. Her dead husband has been dragged through the space, and a horrifying moment. But you see the one character, which is the plantation owner's daughter. She sees the horror of what's going on. And we particularly just picked one person because the majority did not see that. But at the same time, there was always one person in circumstances that helped, and they ended up working together. At the end of Act 1, you have this scene where the three lead characters decide to run. They can't take the humiliation and the torture anymore, and they decide to run, but they left family behind. So the woman on the left is the grandmother of Victoria, and she's left behind to take care of Victoria's children. And once again, we wanted to show that we often see the people that ran as heroes, but the whole structure, the people who stayed behind were also just their will to live was heroic and caring for each other in the situation that they were put into. Also here in Act 2, we start to see the Quakers show up, and there's an artistic choice here that went against really history, but you'll see a cross on the table. The Quakers never would have had a cross or a picture, or I think mostly even any instruments. But we decided to put a cross in so that everyone would kind of know their basic philosophy. And on the left, you see the Quakers were, and some of the abolitionists were risking their lives to fight slavery and to help people, but not all. And so the scene that you see on the right there is a scene where there's huge fights between church people. And that was also a reality. And one of the most noted, commented on scenes is showing that in the production. And here we have the three slaves who run. And so in the show, they are the only characters we follow through the whole show. And that was a specific choice because we wanted to focus on them and see the other abolitionists as helping them along the way, but that they are the main focus of the Underground Railroad. And here you see some Quakers, and this scene was put in to show that some Quakers and abolitionists weren't just passive, but really looking to seek and to help. And one of the ways they did that was they listened to the Frederick Douglasses of the movement, and they would invite them to their gatherings and give them authority in their lives. And so we feature a character that resembles a Frederick Douglass, a Harriet Tubman, and of course, all the runaway slaves trying to make their way to freedom. And the show has a special ending. I won't go into too much detail, but it kind of zooms forward to today and has some things to share about that, including the fact that the story of Black Americans, as Sean has said, is American history. It's Black history and it's church history. And it is something that should guide us and lead us, and is one of the most positive things that we have as far as overcoming the evils that have entrapped our country at times. And so one of the parts of the end of the show is acknowledging that. Out of Störling Dance Theatre's Underground have come many other events that I'll briefly run through. We've had children's literature events. Here you see Judy Jones holding up the book Light in the Darkness. And we've gone around to schools and invited kids to events and brought them in and shared books. We've had Go Underground art exhibitions in Kansas City. We've had galas where we've brought in kind of all of the fancy schmancy folks and brought them together, trying to encourage them to understand our history and embrace it. Here you've got LeVar Burton joining us one year. Pastors Serve is an incredible organization in town. And here you see Dr. Charles Briscoe was behind the show from its inception, and Jimmy Dodd and Pastor Serve, a huge part of our development. We developed a classroom activities curriculum guide, two of our board members, Dr. Davis and MacArthur, and that has been shared with countless teachers around the city. And then one of our favorite things to do every year is over 3,000 kids come to the Kauffman Center and fill the seats, and they get to see the show and experience it. In fact, our vision for Underground, as we do it every year, is that we want to do a lot of performances so that every fifth grader gets to see the show, because fourth, fifth, sixth grade is when they start to study it. But also we want every sophomore to see it again, because that's when they study it and how it relates to their lives today. And so one of the last things that got developed is this booklet that Dr. Bobo and I put together a few years ago. We've shared it with churches, with businesses. It's very accessible. There's no homework needed to go into. And in fact, and what it does is it's got 4 themes in the booklet: fear, stereotypes, tribalism, and family. And people come together and they can read it on the spot. And there's a few things that are always in every book. There's an introductory discussion between myself and Dr. Bobo. There's a story from the Underground Railroad where a Black person and a white person work together. And then there's a story, a heavy story, of persecution post-Underground Railroad in American history. And then it goes straight to discussion questions. And the questions are things that we can all talk about and all share. And so we're going to actually try that out today. The chamber folks are going to help me pull this off. But I would like you all to split up into small chat rooms, and you're going to ask yourself the question, the first question from the chapter on fear. And that is, share with each other a time where you experienced great fear. So they're going to split you up now, and I'll see you in a couple minutes. Okay, everybody. Well, I hope everyone was able to participate in that. One of the reasons we ask that, of course, is because fear is a human reality, and we've all experienced it. And everyone in my group shared something that, except for one, that was personally life-threatening. And so, but that gives us a little bit, as we study the history of the Underground Railroad movement, as we study the history of slavery, as we study the ongoing history of the Black community, it can give us all some empathy and kind of an entree into understanding how even today, even though slavery was abolished, how even today the ramifications of fear and anxiety and expectations can have on a whole community. So I want to do something about it, right? I want to be a part of hope for our city and for our community and for the Black community. And so that's why having Ray Jarrett here is so great. So Ray is Executive Director of UniteKC, and they are really doing something. So Ray, if you're ready, take it over.
All right, fantastic. It's great to be with you today. My name is Ray Jarrett, and I want to just take a little bit of time to highlight how there is a nexus between UniteKC and the Störling Theater underground performance. It is so impactful. If you've never seen it, I sure hope that we get an opportunity to have that program this year. People who go just come away changed. And what it does is spark conversation, an impactful conversation. And so that's the first thing, is that people just started talking. Now, Underground's been going on for, as Jeremiah said, 10, 11, 12, 13 years. But the thing that really started moving our organization to a point where we actually formed was a lot of these people we've networked through the years, through the Underground performance. And so that's where we all met. That's how we established these relationships. And then Dayton Moore, who is the founder of our organization, had a really unique experience when he built the CU in the Major Leagues facility down off of 18th and near 18th and Vine. While he was trying to do the fundraising and have the conversations, he found that a lot of people in the African-American community did not want to have white kids come to their community to take advantage of this wonderful facility. And vice versa, he found out that white people didn't want to come to somewhere. It was in the what was considered the urban district to have their kids there because of things like fear and different things like that. Very disturbing. Some very interesting conversations. And Dayton's hope was that as he was sharing this vision with everybody, hey, I really hope that we can have conversations and have a future where our children don't have to deal with these types of issues. And still, that wasn't enough. But what happened with George Floyd was just a tipping point. And regardless of where people were on the educational spectrum, the political spectrum, we all saw that and realized this is not good. This is a bad thing that has happened. And so through that, we had some conversations. Dayton exchanged some text messages. And at this time, I'd like to share my screen and play you a brief video of just an introduction of what UniteKC is.
When we initially got together and began to discuss some of the issues of racism, we just were talking about what type of community that we desire for our kids and our grandkids.
A lot of different people have taken a stab at this. A lot of organizations, government, lots of people have tried to legislate this. And yet, for some reason, it's been hard to gain traction. And something tipped with George Floyd that all of a sudden, there were more people saying, okay, you know what, I want to get involved. UniteKC is a grassroots movement. It just got started with some very sincere people here
who wanted to take a leadership role in uniting Kansas City.
Racial reconciliation, racial healing, and racial justice.
It's a little confrontational sometimes. The conversations around race are not easy to enter into. We're hoping to create a place where we can bring down some of the barriers.
And I think with UniteKC bringing people together from the community, from businesses, from organizations.
Whether it be mentorship, you may want to donate. We want to identify one good thing that everybody can get involved with.
And so this is beginning to snowball as we have these conversations with our neighbors.
And perhaps at the end of the day, what seems like a real hard, tense situation now can set the stage and create a path for greater opportunity for all in the future.
Let me just walk you through just a few slides on UniteKC. UniteKC is a faith-based grassroots movement. And the thing that is so important about it is that there's three main connecting factors that we believe help to unite our city and to give us an opportunity where we can live fear-free and we can represent this picture about being in a city of fountains where everybody basically has the same opportunities and the same, because a lot of us have the same aspirations. So we really are focusing on right now connecting and educating people. We are not a programming organization. On the contrary, what we do is to seek out people who are already doing wonderful work in our city, partner with them, and see how we can connect our community and our city together. We're domain driven. So when people get involved and they know that they want to do something, it's really hard to just, what do I do? What do I do? Everybody said the same thing last year. But when you start to look at the opportunity from the lens of what your profession is, and so maybe you're in arts and culture, maybe you're in government, maybe you're in criminal justice or business, it could be that you're in healthcare. So when we take a look at having a domain-based system, people can then identify areas of injustice and areas where there needs to be equal opportunity. And so we just believe all that happens with a heart change. Unity, peace, and understanding is what we're after for everybody here. And that's the very first thing that I want to bring out on this slide. How are we different? We believe that it has to come from the heart. we can institute all the programs we want, all the legislation that we want. But when people truly change from the heart by taking a chance, then what we're going to end up with is just a wonderful opportunity for people to see what it is that they can do to get involved. We believe that this is going to be a healing moment for our city. And we have based it and taken back a word that called covenants. We know that in Kansas City, we have some history where divisive covenants were put in place in housing structures to where we have a clear dividing line between Truce and the rest of the city, to where the city has been split. And so again, if we take a look at these 10 domains, we are united to transform our city through this methodology. Here is the nexus. Jeremiah mentioned this earlier. The lie of racism that we believe is so pervasive in our society is that racism is white versus black. That imprisons it imprisons our thinking. And as a matter of fact, it limits the way that we can actually attack the problem. If we use the language of racism, then we're certainly prone to continue and perpetuate the problem. The real problem is good versus evil. Racism is evil, and when people begin to see that, that is the transformational moment that they can have where their hearts can change and they can take a chance on having another conversation, reaching out and inviting everybody to become their neighbors. So here's our starting point. What we do, again, is UniteKC. We're a 501c3. We're a covenant, a funder, and a governance of domain groups. And so all of these domains that I have mentioned previously have adopted their own covenants and their own way that they're going to attack the problem of racism here in Kansas City. And so you can see the different domains that we have. If you go to our website, you can see the different covenants each one of these domains have come up with. And so we've got 10 different domains. We're probably going to split one of the domains, government and criminal justice, so that they can address their own issues. And so we have a personal covenant of one. So here an individual can take a look at what's going on. They can begin that transformation process, and they can connect with a domain that speaks to their heart, and then they can immediately get involved. And that is the power of what we're trying to do, is that all these people will circle around and be a part of these domains within our city. So what is the role of our domain? The first thing is we want to identify and engage other people and other companies and introduce them to those covenants. Then we want to identify some actions, some things that they can get involved in right away, and then help connect the people with the organizations. And so if you take a look at all these different covenant companies that you see here on the screen, when you go to our website, you will see some of the covenanted companies that we are already engaged with and already connecting people with to do one good thing. So they have actions, they have programs, people attacking recidivism, poverty, doing mentorship and trying to do opportunities for one another. And so all of that gets connected through the domain, and that is how we do one good thing. So if you take a look at this slide, you've seen, what we believe, what our goal is, the strategy, which is the domain-based strategy, and then how we intend to engage each individual and organization. And so it is so important to keep in mind that we have to keep in mind that it's a transformation of the heart. And so we've got all of these different strategies of what we're trying to do. But right now, what we're focused on, and please take this away, is education and conversation. Jeremiah laid out wonderful information. So that is a part of the education process. And there's so many more things that we've got listed on our website, unitekc.org. There are movies, there are books, there's even an app that you can download on your smartphone and take a tour of our city, and they point out a narrative tour where they point out different things that have happened in our city that give you an inkling of the racial background that we have here. But the whole thing amounts to where people are going to do one good thing. That's what we're proud of. So this timeline, I'm going to just blaze through it right now. We're already done with a couple of phases. Right now, we're just wanting to expand UniteKC from 4,000 people to getting the whole city involved, and driving people to the website to take a look at what we've been doing. Here are some of the people and the teams that we formed. You can see the business, government, education, all these people who are involved. Again, those folks are on our portal, and there's our board of directors. So at this time, I'm going to stop my share, which has given me some interesting stories to go forward with, and I'm going to turn it back over to our moderators.
Thank you, Ray. I might just add a couple things before we go into the Q&A session. And that is that I kind of neglected, first of all, we are still getting our dates together for Underground, but we'll definitely keep your eyes open for when Underground hits the Kauffman stage this year. And also, if there are companies, kind of two things. If there are companies that are interested in sponsoring Underground, we really need your support, especially for our school day shows, so we can get as many kids there affordably as possible. But also at the business level, if you have a company or organization and would like to get a hold of these discussion booklets, we really encourage you contact us. UniteKC, like all the domains are going through them now. It's really producing great fruit. So please make sure and look at the links, whether it's gounderground.org or unitekc.org. Contact us and let us know what your needs are. But now we're going to, oh, and the other thing I might mention is Ray talked about UniteKC as a grassroots faith-based organization, but everybody's welcome. And what that's about, a big part of what that's about is really the faith community confronting its lack of assertiveness in the area of racial reconciliation and wanting to press hard into that. But everyone's welcome, and we hope you'll look at UniteKC. It's becoming a bigger part of my life, and it's just encouraging to be focused on those people in the city doing one good thing. But we are ready for some Q&A for Ray and I, and Dr. Bobo's here with the other co-author of the booklets, and we might get him to chime in if you ask the right questions. But do we have any questions, Shannon?
Hi, yes, so just a quick note, if you do have questions, you can put them in the chat, but we have a few to start off. So Jeremiah, someone asked, did some Quakers own slaves?
You know, did some Quakers own slaves? I have not read of any Quakers that own slaves. Like I said, they were pretty consistent. It's possible. We don't want to give the impression that every single Quaker was pure and holy. We're not really looking to, what's the word, canonize every single Quaker person. That's really not the point. If there's actually a hero in the Underground Railroad movement, it's really God and those people who took God seriously. The people that just went to church on Sunday and didn't weave the Judeo-Christian principles into their lives, those are the ones that did not follow the right things. There's also that the Judeo-Christian principle that all men and women are created in the image of God and are eternally valuable. That is the core idea that moved the abolitionists. And so it also moved, for example, if you read Jews in the Civil War, the abolitionists in the Jewish community, that was the core principle that drove people. So did any Quakers own slaves? I'm not aware of any, because pretty much if you did, I'm sure you were probably shamed out of the community. They were a pretty serious group, but it's possible.
I'll jump in real quick, Jeremiah. There's a little research search that shows that yes, that there were slave owners amongst the Quakers. They kind of believed, there was a sect of them that believed that as long as you met their spiritual needs and that you took really good care of them, that it was perfectly acceptable. but they quickly moved away from that. And we're talking 15th century thinking. By the time they had come around to the formation of our country, it was not popular subject or not a popular practice with the Quakers.
It pays to have smart friends. That's the other. Thank you, Ray. That's really helpful.
No problem.
Anything else, Shannon?
Okay, yes. Next question is a follow-up. Weren't there just as many Christians holding up the Bible to justify slavery?
Yes, absolutely. There were more, and I had hoped to get that across. Unfortunately, well, the North was free states, the South was pro-slavery, and unfortunately, you had Christians who were utilizing the Bible to support slavery. But Hitler utilized the Bible to support his work. So the Bible can be used for good or evil. When it's used for evil, it has to be distorted to support evil. The Bible does talk about slavery, but back when the Bible was written, the whole world was used slavery as a practice. It was a totally different world back then. And there are criticisms that the Bible doesn't say end slavery now. But the Bible was speaking into a culture that slavery was normal. And what it did was humanize the slave, if you will, and say, masters, don't abuse your slaves. The Bible's criticized for not saying it's an end to saying stop slavery altogether, but it's more complicated than that. The Bible doesn't support abusing anyone at all.
Could I chime in, Jeremiah?
Yes, this is Dr. Bobo.
So I'm doing a 9-week, 10-week teaching series on the book Philemon in the New Testament. If you sneeze, you'll miss it. It's between Titus and Hebrews. And there are instances in the Bible that actually, let's see, how do I put this? Just because the Bible is silent about slavery doesn't mean the Bible is for slavery. And there are several passages, I can show that to you, where the Bible is actually against slavery. You don't find a verse in the Bible that says, thou shalt not be a slave owner. But there's several instances. There's several instances where the Bible is certainly against slavery. And I can show those to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bobo. So what we've just experienced in a microcosm is the Underground Railroad. You've got a white guy who wants to do a good thing, and then you've got the Black community saying, no, here's the truth on that. Here's the facts, Jeremiah, and helping guide me to get there. And that's just really how the Underground Railroad went. So the Bible, but at the same time that's true, that the Bible is against slavery, you had people who were using it to support slavery. So that's evil.
Okay. The next question we have is, I noticed John Brown wasn't mentioned. Where did he fall within your list of abolitionists?
Yes, John Brown is a very intense character. And, you know, the distinguishing thing was he went violently to end slavery. And I am not a historian. I'm not an expert on John Brown, but I didn't include him in my list because he was kind of unique in that way, as opposed to some of the other Underground Railroad people. And so he's just a separate approach to everything. And I'm not an expert on John, so I didn't include him, that's all. But he's definitely worth, if you look on my shelf, there's a book about John Brown that I've recently purchased because I do want to get more in-depth study on him. But the difference was he was a violent man.
Okay, thank you. This question is for Ray. Is UniteKC looking for individual volunteers or more just businesses? How would an individual get involved?
Fantastic question. And so there's 3 ways to get involved. The first way is that this may move you as it has a number of people to just get involved and you want to do one good thing. So whenever we have volunteer opportunities, you would check our website or get on our mailing list and we would let you know about those opportunities. The second way is that you may actually want to help form and be a part of the domain. And so that's a pretty simple thing to do as well. In both cases, you would go to the website and you would click on how can I get involved? How can I get connected? Pick a domain, read about what they're trying to do. And there's an opportunity for you to enter your email address and thereby signing what we are calling a covenant. So that's the second way. You could be a formative part of a domain and get involved in those meetings and involved in the direction that they're going. The third and final way is that you may just want to donate. And again, on the website is an opportunity for you to click and donate. We're spending all of our money that is donated to making sure that we get the word out, that we get get everything established as far as these relationships go, and that we start to do one good thing by, like we've done things to feed the homeless, and we are giving away merchandise and different things like that. So those are the three ways to get involved. All of them, we drive people out to the website to take a look and sign up and get involved.
I can also share a specific, I saw one of the questions, describe one good thing. So I'm in the arts and culture domain. And one of the things we're doing is arts education is underfunded around the Kansas City metropolitan area. And so we are going to go and create a map and show where there are arts education deserts in the city, so that we can start to address that with the help of other arts organizations, whether the governmental groups get involved or not. Because there's so many great arts and culture organizations in Kansas City that want to help, but sometimes you don't know exactly where it's needed. So the one good thing that we're starting with is creating this map of arts education deserts. And then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to create a music video to help promote this message.
Great, thank you. Did you have anything to add to that, Ray? The question was, can you share some of the specific covenants or one good thing your partners are doing?
Sure. So the covenants are usually somewhere around 2 to 3 pages long. So to kind of go through each one of them. But here's another one good thing. So we partnered with Donnelly College. Donnelly College is an organization, and I didn't know this to start out with, but they are the most diverse college in all of the Midwest, in a 4 or 5 state area. And not only that, the Monsignor there has never turned down in his tenure as the person who's running the college. They've never turned away anyone who wanted to come to their college. So our education domain is partnering with them to make sure that deserving African-American students get an opportunity to get an education where otherwise they would not be able to do that. We didn't start that program, but we found out about it and we're trying to put it on the map so that people can be aware of this opportunity that we're trying to curate for them.
That's great. This question is for Jeremiah. Michael asked, have you delved into KC-centric slavery stories? I guess either of you could answer.
Yeah, I can. Well, one of the things that I can share is about Quindaro. It's not a specific person who was a slave, but Quindaro, like I said, she married a man and they were ardent abolitionists. And so they bought the property in Kansas City, Kansas, and they opened it up as a town. There was commerce, it was on the riverfront. So they built a serious town and it was populated. This was one of the reasons why it's such a great story. It's already on the National Historic Place Registry. There's only 6, I think, in the country that are on that registry. But it really deserves to be a national attraction for our city because it was populated by Christian abolitionists, American Indians from the Wyandot tribe, and then a smattering of other people. So they came together to fight slavery. It was different people groups coming together to do the right thing. And then as slaves were made it up through Kansas, they would be hid there and protected there. And you had a whole town committed to this and established just for this purpose. And they were part of what was needed to establish Kansas as a free state, because there was a battle in the voting, and there were pro-slavery people moving into Kansas as well, trying to tip the numbers to make it a slave state. So the Quindaro story is a part of the Underground Railroad story and the slave story. And then there are stories, of course, within that. And one of the first Black colleges was established, and is also connected to that whole movement here in the Kansas area. So we have some really wonderful history. And that's one of the things that I'm personally excited about, is focusing on Quindaro, Pastor Stacy Evans, and the vision that's been going on for 4 decades, really, to make Quindaro known to our city and a part of our education system. That's the story I have.
Okay.
I'll add some things here. We have another presentation. We got tons of presentations if we don't have anything. One of the things that we covered in our launch, one of our pre-launches for UniteKC, was the history of the Truce dividing line and how that came to be. And even though I knew about the dividing line, I was really shocked to know that one of the main catalysts for that happening was the GI Bill that was designed to give a lot of people an equitable, basically to kind of pay them for their service to their country. So we've got tons of things we'd love to share, and so that's why this is such an important time between now and our next big launch event, is that we're really trying to promote these stories and have education and conversation as part of what we're doing here in the city.
Great. Okay, there is a follow-up question to Quindaro. Is there a specific resource on Quindaro that you'd recommend?
You know, the Kansas History Journal did a feature. If you can get a copy of it, this has some really good information. And then there's different web pages. The library has a page on Quindaro. Like I said, Pastor Stacy Evans is in charge of that vision. And she is a pastor of First African Methodist Episcopal Church in Kansas City, Kansas. And I'm hoping that you'll hear, if you come to Culture House or Störling Dance Theatre, you'll be hearing more about her and that vision from us. There's also, I also wanted to mention, I wanted to make sure and mention, there's also, like in UniteKC and our domain work there, we're looking for good things in the arts. And so, for example, in Kansas City, Kansas, CADA, Kansas Academy of Theatrical Arts, has been running 30 years. Judy Jones, you saw her holding the book up in the children's literature event. Judy Jones and her team have been doing incredible work on the city. Look for that, look for CADA. And there's a new project that's about to come out, a young man named Mylan Davis. Did I get that right? Mylan
Gray.
Gray, sorry. I saw Mark Davis on the thing and I got Davis in my brain. Mylan Gray, and he is with Musical Theater Heritage right now. He's started working there after he graduated from college, and he has a vision for a theater company project that he's excited about. And so hopefully you'll be hearing more about Mylan Gray in the future in Kansas City, and look for his name for sure. And if you're interested in supporting a young new theater upstarting company, call Musical Theater Heritage and get a hold of him, because we're real excited about him as well.
Great. I think we have just one more question, and both of you could answer, but what's a key takeaway of what we can learn from the Underground Railroad and how we can apply it to our lives today?
Ray, do you want to go first?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'll let you go first.
Well, I think I've said it. For me, I went on the hunt to learn something from it, to have that takeaway. And the takeaway that I got from it was that being a good person is more difficult than it appears. And I need guidance, and I need a rock, if you will, to hold on to. And that's spiritual language. And the Bible is that rock. The Bible is that place to go to. And of course, as a Christian, I have a relationship with God to go to. But I also need to recognize that just saying I'm a Christian doesn't protect me from doing horrific things. And so the takeaway for me is that God is the hero, and I need to work very hard to stay close to him and to what his word actually says. That's the takeaway that I got from it. I realize that not everyone is a Christian or, considers that. And the Underground Railroad also shows non-Christian people doing good things. I feel strongly that I would not have been a good person at that time unless I had made an aggressive commitment like the Quakers. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, and I'll just give a perspective from a person who has watched this performance. I haven't missed one down through the years. The underground takeaway for me, and even the involvement now where we are closely partnered with UniteKC, it is probably one of the main catalysts that I have seen that Kansas City has as far as a leg up on the entire country, in fact, on having and creating opportunities for people to have conversations. And we can, as people, both Black and white people, we can have a desire to see things change and do something different. But the day-to-day pressures and the things that we go through create what I call the Groundhog Day effect. And everybody's probably seen that movie, The Groundhog Day, where you get up and it's just pretty much the same day, and there's the same people in your circle, and there's the same thinking. You watch the same news channel, you go to church with the same people, and very little changes because there's no impetus, there's no catalyst to change. And so you don't have to go out on the street and hold a sign up and go, I want white friends or I want Black friends. You can just seize those moments. It could be a coffee shop moment where you go to a coffee shop and see people and you talk to them all the time, and you can engage them in conversations. That guidebook that Jeremiah and Luke have created are wonderful things. And so my takeaway and my challenge to everybody who's still listening is to do one good thing, but do one good thing differently. Reach outside of your comfort zone and your bubble, be courageous, have a conversation, have a cup of coffee, and you'll be surprised to see where this leads as far as us all getting what we want. Everybody who is on this call having to have that opportunity to really embrace some diversity in our city, some real diversity in our city.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Greg Valdivino. I'm the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. And before we sign off, we would like to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'd like to thank Jeremiah, Kevin Cloud, and Shannon Bitten from Störling Dance Theatre, and Ray Jarrett, UniteKC. Thank you to the workshop series sponsor, Commerce Bank, and thank you to our diversity and inclusion sponsor as well. These programs would not be possible without your generous support. It's no coincidence that this program was held on the last week of Black History Month. However, we will continue to celebrate Black history all year long, and we encourage you to do the same. Our next program is scheduled for April 27th of this year. This time we'll focus on cultivating a diverse workforce by Chamber member and friend Nicole Jacobs-Silvey. Until then, stay safe and healthy, and remember to do one good thing. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Greg.